Being a trucker means constant travel. Constant travel means constant change, and constant change means constant danger. This was something I had to accept when I took the job all those years ago. But back then, I thought that nothing would ever happen to me. There was no chance of me running into danger. I was completely invincible behind the wheel of my rig. But hell, was I wrong. I'd crossed the state border a while ago, and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen anyone else on the roads for miles, and I was getting bored of listening to chat show after chat show. Suddenly, the truck started slowing down. I put my foot down harder on the pedal, but it had no effect. I shook myself wide awake and sat up. My truck rolled a few more meters, then came to a halt. I just sat there for a minute, confused, before I unclipped my belt and climbed out. I quickly came to the realization that I had run out of fuel. I was pretty pissed at myself for not paying more attention, and thinking about it, I did hear the warning bleep some time ago. I was about to call my boss when I heard a voice from behind me. I swung around real fast, holding my phone as if it were a weapon. The man slowly approaching me looked to be in his early 40s, with graying hair and a mustache. He seemed to be chewing a lump of tobacco and walking with a slight limp. "Looks like you've run out of gas," he croaked, still approaching me. I shrugged and told him that I'd be fine, and I started to walk back towards the truck. "I've got a place not so far from here where I could get you some fuel." I didn't believe him. Too many things didn't add up. Why was he out here, at this location, at this time, just as I broke down? I said that I already had some in the back and didn't need any help. I got in and locked the doors. I just wanted this man to go away. I saw him walk off into the trees and disappear. I called my boss, and he said he'd sent someone out to tow me, but it might take some time. I ended up falling asleep where I sat, feeling much more secure with my doors locked and the man gone. I woke up sometime later and realized that I was moving. I was confused at first, but then remembered that someone had been sent to tow the truck. I wondered why they didn't wake me up, but maybe they tried. I'm a deep sleeper, and the doors were locked. I noticed that it was still dark outside and tried to figure out where we were on the map. I couldn't see any signs along the side of the road and had no clue where I was. I opened the window and shouted round to the driver, "Where are we going?" Why hadn't he just taken me to the garage? After a while, we appeared to be on a very rural road, almost like we were driving through a forest. In the distance, there was a large barn we seemed to be heading towards. I couldn't get the attention of the tower, so I called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely puzzled and said the tow truck wasn't due to arrive at my location for another hour. I was losing it and shouted at my boss, "Then who the hell is towing me?" My boss called the police and told me to try to get out of the vehicle. I didn't need to be told twice. I swung open the door and jumped out. I was winded and lay there for a moment. The tow truck then stopped. The tow trucker must have heard the sound of the door. I got up immediately and ran. I had no clue where I was and chose a random direction. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him and immediately recognized his face. It was the man from earlier. He spat a mound of tobacco out of his mouth and jumped out of the truck. I ran faster and faster, but then I heard the noise of a gunshot ring out. I hit the floor and crawled behind the nearest tree, terrified. The man was walking fast now and shouting for me to come out. He didn't see exactly where I went, but he probably had a pretty good idea. I managed to drag myself behind a log, breathing as quietly as I could. The man was getting closer, calling, "Turn yourself in, and it'll be quick." I couldn't move anymore now. He would hear me. The man stopped right next to my log, looked around, and ran off in another direction. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked out. The man was about 100 meters away and looking right at me. I bolted for the truck and made it underneath, hearing the sound of bullets slamming against the metal. I had nowhere to run, and he was here. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard the sound of sirens. The man swore and ran off into the woods. I climbed out from under the truck and met the officers that had arrived. 2 of them had already run off after the man. They asked me what had happened and took me back to the station for questioning. I answered all of their questions and told them about the barn I was being towed to. It was inspected and sealed off. When I asked what they found, I was told that it was best I didn't know. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in the truck. However, I do know one thing. That man is still on the loose, and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. As a trucker, I travel a lot, traveling to places I wish I hadn't been. As a trucker, I see a lot, seeing some things I wish I'd never seen. As a trucker, I experience a lot, experiencing things I wish I'd never experienced. But it is these things that make me who I am, and that is why I love the job, not knowing what I'll run into next. However, unknowing means you cannot foresee how you will act in certain situations, and I do not make the right choices in certain situations, at all. I was in the UK a while back, taking a load up to the north of England. It was dark with few stars in the sky. I couldn't quite focus on the road for some reason, and kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes passed of me doing this. I looked up and caught it right in my headlights. Sprawled out on the ground was a body. It wasn't moving. I pulled the truck into the side and climbed out. I approached the body slowly. I cautiously asked, "Are you okay, sir?" No reply. I walked over, about to take his pulse. I then realized there was no need. Blood was oozing out from underneath him, an obvious stab wound. It was clear to see the man was dead, and I knew that I had to call the police. I dialed 999 and explained to them what I had found. They said that they would send someone out to me and to stay put. A few moments later, I heard voices, shouting, and the sound of fast footsteps hitting the floor hard. I could make out the silhouettes of two men, one carrying a bag, and I knew exactly what that was for. I sprinted back to my truck and clambered in, my heart pounding. How could this be happening to me? That was the question thumping inside my head. The men had made it to the body now, one chucking the bag onto it and then running for his car. I hadn't seen them parked on the other side of the road. The second man ran over to my truck and started trying to climb up. I opened the door powerfully on his face. He cried out in agony and fell backwards. I did the only thing I could think of to do. Drive. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and got out of there as quickly as I could, relieved that I had gotten away in time. The relief didn't last long, as I noticed headlights behind me. I was being chased down, and of course, he was much faster than me. The car behind me was gradually gaining speed. I knew I couldn't outrun him, but I sure could outsize him. I waited until he was right on my tail and then crushed the brake. I was flung forwards in my seat. By the time I had recovered, he was gone. I did not know where or how I hadn't hit him. I saw a turn a few yards to the left and could only assume he had taken that. I put my foot down once again. I wanted to make sure that the other man did not catch up. I had been speeding along for a good 5 minutes when I noticed something in the middle of the road ahead. It was two cars that I recognized. It was the men. They had formed some kind of roadblock. 1,000 thoughts were spinning around in my head. Had I really stumbled across something so serious that these people needed me dead? Why would they not just attempt to get away? What do I do now? Earlier, I talked about how, in certain situations, I make the wrong choices. This was one of these times. I plowed straight through the block and didn't stop. The cops arrived at the scene and questioned me about what happened and how two cars ended up lying wrecked in the middle of the road. I told them what I had done. One man had been hospitalized, and the other had escaped on foot. Detectives found fresh tire marks nearby and deduced that the man had gotten away by car. It turned out that the men were gang leaders. The two of them had killed the man I found on the side of the road, who was also identified as the leader of a gang. I still curse myself that the other man got away. For some reason, I can never shake off the feeling that somehow I'll see him again. The mind is a delicate vessel. Feed it too much, and it collapses. Feed it too little, and it dissolves. But if you keep feeding the mind the same thing over and over, it becomes routine and nothing out of the ordinary, or so they say. Over the course of my trucking career, I've seen all manner of terrifying things, more than any one person should be subjected to, and it is these things that have made my mind collapse. I hear a noise at night, and it doesn't feel like an ordinary occurrence. Instead, it petrifies me. All the terrible things that I have experienced come rushing back to me, and all it would take is a snap of a twig behind me in the forest. My experiences have made me paranoid, but it is this very paranoia that saved my life. I had been driving for what seemed like days, endlessly moving forward along road, after road, after road. My eyes fixated on the ground in front of me. I was starving. I needed a break, and my Radiohead playlist was coming to an end. I pulled up at a petrol station and filled up the rig. I paid and moved it to a parking lot the other side of the station. The parking lot was nearly deserted, but a few cars were scattered around here and there. I didn't like the feel of the place. Something about it made me shiver. I shrugged it off and went into the station for coffee and a bite to eat. I returned to my truck an hour or so later and got in. I had driven a good few miles when I heard a tapping. I slowed my truck down and observed the road around me. There were no other cars. Where did that noise come from? I carried on driving, and after a while I heard it again, even louder this time. What was going on? By now I was incredibly confused, but I continued driving nonetheless. After 20 minutes, I heard repeated tapping. This time, I knew exactly where it came from. It was from inside the truck. If I wasn't so paranoid all the time, I would have passed it off as something in the mechanics making the sound. But I knew I couldn't just assume that. I stopped at the side of the road and got out. I walked around to the back. The first thing I noticed was that the clamp had been busted off and the doors had been tampered with. I was puzzled and opened them up. Inside, everything was as it should be. No one was inside, no boxes moved, and it all looked to be okay. I reattached the clamp and got back in. I knew something human had broken the lock. Maybe they broke it but couldn't figure out how to get the doors open. While this was unsettling, at least I knew nothing was in there. I drove back off into the night. I drove for hours more when, eventually, I suddenly felt a great unease. Something was in the back. I knew it. I stopped the truck, got my gun out of the glove box, and marched around. I undid the clamp and flung open the doors, my gun raised. Inside, again, I saw nothing. I couldn't believe it. I knew something was in there. I lowered my gun and was ready to walk away when I saw something move. Someone was climbing out from behind some boxes and standing up. The dark figure stood at the other end of the truck. I shot at him and missed. I shot again and again without hitting whoever it was. The thing started walking towards me, fast. It had nearly reached me, and I pulled the trigger. My gun clicked empty. I threw it onto the ground and hurled the doors shut, feeling pressure put against them on the other side. I managed to clip the bolt in and immediately called the police. They were with me quickly, and I explained the situation. One officer opened the doors while the other covered him. Both of them entered the truck and began to look behind the boxes. A few minutes later, they got out and told me that they didn't find anyone, but they did find one thing. A carving of a body with a slit throat had been etched into one of the boxes at the back, and the knife was still stuck in. It was tested for fingerprints, but none were found. A few weeks later, I was driving along when I heard tapping once again. I couldn't bring myself to look in the back. I just told myself it was my mind playing tricks. I pray to God that I was right.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. You can submit your stories to our email in the description. Stay safe. See you guys in the next one.